Welcome to another episode of a little impromptu episode where we get Steve's thoughts as he's at his cutting edge. The thoughts that he's come to me today, we're going to discuss about where you kind of dictate where you start a block in comparison to where you finish a block, and kind of how this relationship between where you start and when you finish keeps playing out over time as you get stronger, right? So before we started this call, Steve mentioned to me a little bit about his own training, and he said, like, compared to where I was last block, I actually started lighter. So do you want to just explain your thought processes as to what's going on?
Yeah. Okay. So I think looking at it for myself, I had a very successful block the last few blocks, right? It wasn't just the one. It was probably two or three successful blocks leading in up to last week. And I was just have a lot of momentum and going really well. So last week, obviously, I squatted 270 for two, and that's almost back up there with the best I've done. It's actually the weight that I missed at Worlds as well, and I hit it pretty easy. And it's just, I kind of sat down after it, and I was thinking to myself, I need to acknowledge this, how this happened and how I'm going to then play out the next block without kind of burning out. Because naturally in our head, we think, okay, having a successful block, nothing much is going to change leading into the next block, right? Because we've kind of got a good recipe going, things are cooking, we're going well. So for me, it's all right, if this is so successful and I've done so much more this block, that doesn't mean that I have to start it higher than what I started the last one. I mean, naturally thinking, it is that's in an ideal world, that's what we want to do, right? Well, let's say if I look back at the block before I started the week one squat fives, I did 220 for five, and then that ran, and we properly decided that we're going to run a 3-week block just so then I could run it into states. And then after that, I finished my other day. I started on 240 for two for my squat, then did 250 for two, and then did a 20 kilo jump into 272 because of that kind of, oh, we're only running this for 3 weeks. Let's see what happens. And I did 272, relatively easy, not super taxing, but enough for me to acknowledge that, hey, I'm going to have to start this block pretty easy so I can rebuild that momentum. It's like the ceiling's now risen, right? So once that ceiling rises, that doesn't necessarily mean that the baseline's gone with it straight away. Obviously, the baseline is going to come up and you're going to get stronger, but we can't just expect that to be the case every time. So I've started then on 205, just 15 or 20 kilos less. I can't remember. I think it might have been 220 I started on. Less than what I did the previous block, with 1 rep less, but also just acknowledging the fact that I got to 270 in such a short amount of time and got to 245 for five the last block as well. So the way that I look at it is I've accumulated quite a bit of fatigue, because that's obviously the most successful block I had, even leading up to Worlds and everything like that, for so long, that if I were to just be okay, so I know in my head and in my body that I'm capable of was starting yesterday at 225 for four, which was plus 5 kilos and minus 1 rep. I could have done that, but did I need to do that? Probably not. So rather than me doing that and expecting me to just do it just based on last block, I kind of just went away from that, detached myself, and just thought I don't necessarily need to start higher just because I finished in such a good spot. And also, if I can start down here, because a lot of this actually happened in my brain. I've had these conversations with athletes, but it's really hard, and you probably know yourself, as an athlete, to detach from the numbers sometimes and just be I can start this block lighter because I am a bit tired and fatigued, and being okay with it. But a lot of this kind of happened for me from having a month off for the first time in 7 years when I was in Europe. And I came back, and almost immediately, I started that first week really light, just moving. And the momentum that I got from that over a 2-week period was just insane. I pulled the fastest 290 kilo deadlift I've ever done, I think 7 or 8 weeks after getting back. and I didn't really do anything hard. I pushed the first block like I would have used to have done, and then kind of realized afterwards, like, hey, you didn't need to do that. And I started again. I started that next block after lighter than what I started when I got back. Probably not as light. I think there was a bit of variance. I wouldn't say the week 1 of when I got back, but the week 2 of when I got back, it was a bit below that. And it was just more the realization that after that time off, my body is that trained enough that I can give it this kind of washout week. And I guess this is what people label a week 0 or a deload week. But how often do we need to do that? And when do we need to do that? Because it's not something that we need to do all the time. It's not something that, hey, this person needs a deload after every block. There's certain people where we have this rolling momentum going because they haven't decided to capitalize so much on that block that we can just we do resensitize. We do start heavier than what we did the week 1 of the block before, and then we do finish higher. And that's a different scenario. So it's like picking your block, I suppose, that you're going to shoot for. And I guess at the same time, that comes down to a lot of different circumstances, right? So if you have someone, like I said, pre-recording this, like we have someone that's in a surplus, all their external factors are covered, like all the boxes are ticked and everything, like the environment for them to progress is so much higher than if someone like myself, even though I'm doing everything that I possibly can. I've been in the same weight class since I started 7 years ago competing. So I can't exactly just pull out a PI every block out. I'd be hitting absurd numbers that just wouldn't make sense. So I think of a way to word it, but I would suppose it's just like understanding what the goal of the block is, and we have like developmental blocks and blocks where we're kind of rolling through momentum, just like rolling with the punches, getting stuff done. And then it'll be like, okay, it's time to capitalize on all that work that's being done now, and take the chains off, really, almost. But we have, I guess, different types of athletes where they're pushing every session. I've got quite a few on my roster where it's like they'll go hard all the time, and then they expect to PR at the end of the block, and then sometimes they don't, unfortunately, and can't realize why. And it's because you've just accumulated so much fatigue for the last 3 blocks that on that 4th one you couldn't PR, which is potentially you should have just taken that time at almost the start of maybe every 2nd or 3rd block to just let yourself kind of recalibrate, let your body catch up, and then we can shoot again.
Yeah, I think we discussed it yesterday, but understanding a language or trying to define the goal of the block is really important, because every time you explain this to someone, right, you don't want to be saying hey, in this block, we're trying to just set momentum for the next one, so and so. You kind of just want to have a name to define it so that the athlete understands okay, in this block, I'm not trying to capitalize and run myself into the ground, because after this block is where I need to set myself up for a big competition, right? And what we came down to, and you already alluded to it, were these 2 words, which is a rolling kind of block that kind of rolls into the next one versus one where you're capitalizing, right? Yeah. So the difference being how hard you're pushing and what you're expecting out of that block by the end of it. So these rolling kind of blocks, you can kind of expect to hit some sort of sub-maximal RPE, PR, where you have not completely run yourself into the ground and kind of forced you to take that easier week 1 or week 0 kind of load, compared to a capitalizing block where it's you're in the middle of a comp prep and you kind of want to see where your top end is at. So you want to predict what's going to happen on comp day, things like that. And you kind of want to maximize overreaching, those kinds of periods. Capitalizing is a good way to describe it, because it's you're trying to build everything up to this one performance and see what happens after that.
Yeah, for sure. And then it's acknowledging how much fatigue you've generated because of these. If you keep taking these blocks where you're trying to capitalize on everything, where you're trying to hit a PR every single block, like I said, not everyone is in an environment where they can do that, because, myself, perfect example, been in 74 kilo weight class since 2015, 2016. I'm just not in a surplus. I'm not, to be able to perform at my best. I do everything else. I get my movement in, sleep, food, do the things that make me happy. So I'm always kind of feeling good, but I just can't do that, and it's also acknowledging the little things as well. Like I did notice after the 270 for 2, like my hip was a bit like I felt it again. And it was like, that was a kind of feeling for me. And I just had to be like, hey, if you do what you did 6 months ago or 10 months, 12 months ago, you're going to end up in that same spot again. So let's take a week and let your body, like I said, recalibrate, readjust, and then we can go again, rather than, for me, ending up back injured.
Yeah, it's just listening to your body, right? Rather than expecting like you need to push every single block. So
Yeah.
I guess that begs the question then, how often would you expect to be in sort of this rolling kind of block versus one where you're capitalizing? And then a second follow-up is like, as you start getting stronger, because like you mentioned, people that are like in a surplus, or maybe people that are like still novice intermediate versus more advanced people, how do you kind of split up whether you expect to be like rolling through or capitalizing every block?
Okay, so obviously the level of an athlete is a big thing there. Like you said, like if we have the novice intermediate type lifter, there is more, chance for them to be able to PR block to block to block until they hit that more advanced stage. And that's just the nature of the sport. It's easier to gain muscle and strength at the start, right? And it just happens as the body creates adaptations, but it slows down. We both know that. And then it's then being able to realize as an athlete that, hey, this process is slowing down. How can I get the most out of it without killing myself? And I can use examples. If I use an example, I would like to use the Tonganator as an example, but I won't, because he is in a surplus at the moment. And, you've seen the meet prep that he's had, and it's phenomenal. He's put a lot on will put a lot on his total this weekend, but I'll use Yanni as an example instead, because he's obviously had a great prep as well. And what I did programming wise for him, because if you look at Yanni's training, he's go all the time. He's like, some of the conversations that we've had is he wants to be one of the very best in the world. He wants to, establish himself as a 105. He wants to take over me, for example, on dots. Like he wants to be the number 1 drag dusted powerlifter in Australia. And you'll disregarding as an athlete, like I won't let that happen, but I love him. But you obviously he's chasing, right? And so he was pushing himself so hard, block to block to block. And I was just noticing these trends in his performance, that at the end of the block, he was never really able to capitalize on anything he was doing, because he was just starting the block a bit too heavy, and then expecting that to be like, hey, if I start it, let's say his deadlift, he starts at 260, and then he goes from 260 to 280 to 295 to 310 or something in a block. Like, can he keep doing that, take these even jumps, where he didn't need to do that? So I let that play out for, I think, 2 or 3 blocks of just like specifically having him just like RPE based. And then once I acknowledged that, it was after like multiple conversations of just saying, hey man, you're going a bit too hard at the start, and he was receptive of that, but then training was not showcasing that at the same time. So from my point of view, I could acknowledge that. I know exactly how hard he wants to work, because I'm like that myself, where every session we're coming in with absolute intent. We're doing things as hard as we can, and we want to do that. So what I did is I did a block for him where I wrote out the first 3 weeks, and I prescribed his load on his squat and deadlift. And I started at his singles at 60 something percent. I can't remember, because it was the block pre this block, which obviously a single at 60% is nothing. Most people can rep that out for a set of 10 plus. But it was like very, very light. And what this does is, although like he wasn't really able to PR so much in those 3 blocks where he was just pushing himself and he accumulated a ton of fatigue, once I got rid of that, and it took a lot longer to get rid of it, because he did it for so much longer, that I literally went like, I think I programmed 60 something percent something small, like maybe a 5% jump or a 4% jump, and then into the same jump again on both his squat and deadlift. And then I finished the block off with a RPE, and he plus 40'd in 1 week.
Holy shit.
So yeah, so it was me educating him through programming while I just steered the ship. I navigated the ship and just showed him that, hey, you don't need to lift heavy all the time to get stronger. But all that did, so what that time did was almost, we capitalized on those 3 blocks of him pushing. And then I let him show it there, and he just moved loads that he's not moved before so much faster. And I believe this is why this peaking block now into men's state has been so successful.
Yeah. I'm just curious, you mentioned like that big 40 kilo jump. Where is that in relative to what he was doing when he was like pushing really, really hard, those prior 3 blocks?
So the prior 3 blocks, he'd take more of an even style jump. So it'd be like 12.5 1 week, 12.5, 12.5, 12.5 or something, or 10, 10, 10, something like that. Or, you know, just something that wasn't so big. And then it was like, put him right back. I acknowledged how long he'd been doing this for, and then just prescribed it. And I know a lot of people will say, oh, I'm in low cap jail, I'm in low, like, you know, and all this, and say that it's like a bad thing, but it's not. Well, as a coach, we're doing it for a reason. We're not, you know, how do I do? We're not cracking the whip on you. We're not doing anything like that. It's nothing like that. It's just, we're trying to make sure that we're figuring you out in a way. And if we can do it just by programming it, it's education at the same time for the athlete.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the question that I was trying to get at is like, say, for example, he hit like, and I'm just putting numbers on it because I'm not sure what his exact numbers are, but say he squats like 300 in his blocks where he's pushing really hard, and then he jumps 40 kilos extra in this kind of block where it's like easy, 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 and then a big jump. Does he still end up on like 300, or what happens there?
He did, but it was so the thing about that was I gave him 2 weeks of RPE after the 3 weeks of prescription, and he took like a 40 kilo jump and then could only manage a 10 kilo jump a week after. So I was like, you could have PR'd had you have not taken that huge jump. He's like, but it felt good, and I was like, of course it felt good, but that's more education itself. And like as coaches, it's our job to educate our athletes on what we're trying to get out of them, what we're trying to achieve. So that was just a conversation that we had personally towards each other then, but it didn't cook him nowhere near as much. And then we ran this whole block out interstates RPE wise. So I guess in a way, what this did is this block where I prescribed all these percentages, it just educated him more on the pacing that he needs. And he doesn't really need to go super, super hard all the time, because of the amount of load that he's lifting, right, is going to accumulate so much fatigue if he just keeps doing it. So it really showed him the pacing that works for him. So we can do this other ways as well. There's also, we know Yanni can rep squats out for days too, right? But we've kept his secondary day not over 200 kilos. So, and he squatted 315 last week. We just decided, hey, like I capped it at 220 because I knew that he was pushing that too hard. And that was what we took into this peaking block is, I want you to be able to, you know, showcase the work that we've done in your singles now. Like this is that, I guess, that capitalization phase on capitalizing on what we've done. So you can do that now, giving you the freedom of RPE and you to be able to make the call on what load you're going to hit. But I'm going to now take the reins over the secondary day and not let you go too hard on that, because that'll induce too much fatigue leading into the other day. And obviously things worked out really well. So that was another thing too, is when I took the prescriptions away from, or added them in, I still let him go on that secondary day RPE wise, and he hit some absurd numbers. So it was just letting him kind of capitalize, develop, and establish that baseline to match everything that he'd done through that secondary day through rep work to build things up. And then going into the peaking block, kind of just like flipped it and just, you know, reverse played it like that and let him go on the heavier stuff and bring the rep stuff right down.
Yeah. So, I mean, in essence, it's almost like, so you've given us like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 blocks. So it was like capitalize, 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 all by accident, or just because he was pushing so hard.
Yeah.
one kind of rolling block to wash out some fatigue. And now that you're kind of constrained by comp, but I imagine had it not been competition, you would have like just kept it rolling. But now it's like rolling, capitalize right on comp day.
Yeah, exactly like that. So it was just acknowledging, right? Like we can't make a call for this for an athlete right off the bat. It's extremely hard to do. Just because everyone responds to different percentage ranges. People can rep out different things. Like I have girls that I coach that can rep out 80 to 90% for absurd amounts of reps, but then you put 5 kilos on the bar and they'll miss it. It's like bench press, right? We have this sweet spot where we can rep out so much. Like I can rep 140 to 150 for 7 to 10 or something, but you get me up to 170 and I start to fall apart. And it's like, so just pushing it too hard all the time, pushing the wrong kind of, I guess, what word am I looking for? Pushing the wrong component of your block can just lead to more interference that's unnecessary. And then as coaches, we, absorb that information, let things play out, because if we jump in too early, we could almost, make things fall apart ourselves. And we need to let the athlete kind of let things play out. So I let it play out, and then I jumped in, took the wheel, and now had the best prep ever. And like Yanni's not in a surplus. He actually had to be in a bit of a deficit for this. He had to get back down, and he's filled out here. He competed at 105 not that long ago, and now he's going to add 40 kilos to his total.
Yeah. So to me, it sounds like you found a way to sustainably get people to like still progress, right? Because like you can kind of assume that everyone, if they train hard enough, the gains are going to come. The adaptations are for sure going to be rolling through, but you just can't capitalize it because the fatigue is so high, and trying to do it for so long is kind of like you're eventually going to strike a point where like something's going to happen, right? Like hip might go for you, for example, or like some sort of accident is just more likely to happen. Not saying that it will happen, but chances are it's going to happen, right?
Yeah. Well,
but
the likelihood of injuries like that happening comes strictly down to load management, right? And that's all I did was load managing. And then I guess he wasn't falling apart or anything like that. I just noticed that it was just like we were hitting a wall basically, and the wheels were just spinning constantly. So it's just taking control, acknowledging, and then washing it out, because I knew we had to prep after this block that I had prior. So I knew that we needed to go into a peak after. And if we're going to have another block where we're just spinning our wheels, it's just not going to be very productive going into the block that's picking him into the competition.
yeah, I imagine those like capitalizing blocks where he's like pushing really, really hard though would have contributed to the way that it's performing now. Because like if you're constantly and I don't want to say like undershooting it, but like in this rolling scenario where it's like you're stopping right before things start getting grindy and things like that. I think that's like a sweet spot. But like say for example, if it's not that exactly, and it's like you're kind of just chilling at this range of like at 5, at 6 the whole block, that's much different compared to someone who's like pushing really, really, really hard, and then you just give them that like load management strategy. Is that correct?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, this isn't going to happen for everyone. Not everyone is like that and as determined and wanting to be the best in the world. So they're not going to show up to every session with absolute intent every single time. And they are more, I guess, I wouldn't say Yanni isn't adherent to RPE, but just like not acknowledging that his RPE scale might be a bit off in terms of exertion and what that does to his body. And then also the loads that he picks is he's thinking about how much he wants to pull, not how much he should be pulling or squatting in that day.
Yeah. I imagine, even for myself, that's a big mistake. Trying to hit a certain number versus just acknowledging what's there and believing that like, okay, even if I finish now, I still have another block ahead of me.
Yeah. So it's like we almost put ourselves in a position sometimes to lift something based on what we want to hit at the end of the block. So it's like, hey, I haven't earned the ability myself, for example. I wouldn't say that I earned the ability to be able to squat 270 for 2 last week, based on the fact that it was plus 20 and a double. And I hadn't 250 the week prize was literally the heaviest load I put on my back since Worlds. So I hadn't earned it, but I'd done it before, and I know that the work had been done. And it's just being okay with, hey, there didn't need to be that middle week where I got up around 260 and did it, then it's only class 10. It was just like, no, it'll be okay.
Yeah.
And no, I didn't feel very extremely cooked after. Like, I sat down and acknowledged that I'm probably going to be more fatigued going into the week one now than I have been in the last few previous blocks. But at the same time, that's how now I've taken this week. This week's now more like a deload. Week 0, some people say, but it's still week 1, and it's just setting me up for the rest of the block, just by acknowledging how much I actually did at the end of that block.
Yeah. And like zooming out on that as well, like your 270 for a double in relative to like what you've hit all time is still, you're still kind of like building back towards that, right? So everything for you right now is still kind of in that rolling kind of range, unless you decide to go crazy this block and like hit something at 10. That's where you might like start to hit a wall again. But like, let's not jinx
I
that.
got to get on the platforming for a week, so let's see what happens.
Yeah.
But I like going back to what you said, like that accumulation of those like 3 blocks. It's not a bad thing. We learned a lot from that, and it's so if like zooming out over that. So if we go, there's 3 blocks, and then there's the 2 that we're specifically talking about where I dialed things back and played with the nozzle myself and took over the steering wheel, and I started navigating everything specifically on a numbers basis from what I wanted and what I perceived would work really well. The last 2 blocks literally being the capitalization of those 3 blocks of him pushing so hard. So like we talk about like what the goal of a block is, and if we're going to capitalize on something, we capitalize it, we pick when, but it has to come from like an accumulation phase of like these rolling momentum kind of blocks, which is like rolling blocks where we're rolling through, and it's like, okay, let's go now. Like we've done enough work now that we can do it. So it's like, sometimes you will see people like out of nowhere hit a 20 kilo PR, but they've been just grinding, doing the work for 3 or 4 months. And then they're like, yep, okay, this is time. That's what I want. Let's go now.
Yeah. I imagine like for myself as well, like trying to relate that to what concept that you're trying to apply is like, for me, it was like post Perth Cup, naturally like motivation for me after a comp is high. So I was like training pretty much balls to the wall until you told me like, hey, I need you to chill out. And then that's like probably 2 months ago. So 3 months worth of like pushing really, really hard before I decided to like then just play it safe and pace myself as you've described with Yanni's case, kind of just organically. And then now like all-time PRs are starting to roll through. But like you said, I still attribute like a lot of that productivity from pushing at balls to the wall. It's just like you need to have this phase where you can kind of capitalize that's far from comp. But then as you start getting closer to comp, especially for those people that do push really hard, you need to kind of like wash out the fatigue. So then you can do it one more time right before comp.
Yeah, 100%. Like if you didn't have those blocks where you were pushing, as you said, balls to the wall, use that reference. If you weren't pushing those blocks so hard, we wouldn't have had to have that conversation. And you probably would have ended in a lower spot at the same time, because you wouldn't have been adapted as well to hitting higher heavy loads. So you created adaptations that way as well, and you pushed it really hard. And then we just kind of washed things out a bit and then just let it kind of flow through to competition. And it's been very successful since then. You came into this peaking block the best you've ever felt.
Yeah. I still imagine like post this comp, I'm still going to go balls to the wall. Like,
yeah. But you're so far away from competition. We know that that's fine. As long as you don't get hurt, that it's going to be okay for you to do that. But only do it for a certain amount of time, and then just have that week or 2 where you're like, hey, it's okay. I can strip it back a little bit, let my body recover and move fast. Even if it's down on what usually would be a week 1 and week 2. Because we know you, like if we use you as an example, you push every block very hard. And when you push blocks very hard consistently, you have quite poor performing first 2 weeks of a block.
Yeah.
Religiously back when that would happen. And then like when we're like, hey, let's chill so we can actually get some real momentum rolling right through. You started way fresher on the week 1. And it's just like acknowledging that, like if you accumulate 2 too much hard work and then you just keep trying to go hard, you probably get hurt or your wheels just start spinning.
Yeah, I think like I guess you know how you've got like time to peak. There's like blocks of number of times you could do that before you start running into the red. Like I think
Yeah,
it's an idea that's coming to me like as we're speaking, but it's like you've got your time to peak, but like once you hit 3 blocks where you're like pushing it really, really hard, it's best advised that you like then start to go into something that's a bit more conservative or more momentum based. So then you can wash out that fatigue. And I guess you can only come to this conclusion once you've trained hard enough for a long enough period of time, right? So it's just trying to get more data when you start working with athletes that do really want to push.
Yeah, 100%. So it's like we said, like the novice intermediate level athletes probably can get away with that pushing relatively hard all the time. But then I think at the same time, I don't think those novice intermediate level athletes have to hang around 5 to 6 all the time. 7.
Yeah.
Like, there are people that we will prescribe, 8s and 9s more consistently to push that to because we can get away with that. Whereas like our more advanced athletes that we work with, we can work more submaximally unless we know that their like recoverability sources and everything are very high.
Yeah. And I mean, we're about to close things out, but to kind of link it to like, we've got golden microcycles. As you get more advanced, like only a small percentage of things work, right? So it's like you always kind of want to stay within that range. And I think this kind of adds another dial because like you could do the same kind of prescription and have the intent to capitalize on it versus the intent to kind of just roll through with the same kind of volume, same sort of intensity, exact same layout, but just saying, hey, I want you to capitalize versus, hey, like we don't need to push so hard, just roll through.
Yeah, exactly like that. You can have that conversation with someone, or you can do what I did and just prescribe it. There's obviously different athletes that you're working with, right? For yourself, I could just have that conversation and you take it on board and detach yourself and acknowledge it. Whereas I had the conversation with someone like Yanni as well, but it was still pushing. That's nothing against him whatsoever. Like that's him as an athlete. He just loves training hard. But it was like that at that point I had to, start navigating the ship and take my hand more on point with everything.
Yeah, for sure. Right. Anyways, I think that pretty much covers everything we wanted to go over. Episode's about to close out. So anyone listening, if you do hear us starting to mention like capitalize versus rolling, I mean, you would have listened to the episode already, so you do get to kind of take this into application as you do listen to this. So thanks, guys, for listening.
Yeah.
And if we see another episode, we'll tune in next time. Thank you.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
thank you.